Hello and welcome back. You know, I've been in the field of diversity and inclusion for several decades, and I have to say that despite the fact that I have been banging on about racial equality for decades, I was very disappointed at the pace of change. I have been very disappointed at the pace of change. It's been slow even after the Parker Review. We've had Baroness Ruby McGregor's research, and yet there was still a slight pause, shall I say, on ethnicity. And then, boom, out of nowhere, we suddenly have this compulsory ethnic pay reporting, which just came out of nowhere, it felt like. So I just wanted to spend a little bit of time talking to Sandra, who I know was a major instigator behind this happening. Sandra, what was the impetus? Why, after years of sort of nothing, suddenly this came about?
So can I say, like Pamela, I've been working in this area for a number of years, and it might feel sudden, but I was aware that with the last elections, all of the party manifestos talked about looking at ethnicity and pay. So I expected that we were going to get here because it was a commitment to take action as to what they would do, but there was definitely a commitment to look at it. But when we ran our original Race at Work survey in 2015, we asked the government to do a review, and that in part spearheaded the McGregor-Smith review. And then when we ran the Race at Work survey in 2018, we were asked to run it. We were asked to ask a question of employees: does your employer collect ethnicity and pay? And of course, I knew that there wasn't many organisations who had published ethnicity and pay in the public domain, and only 11% came back saying yes, their employers were capturing that data. And when we looked at smaller organisations, it was only 8%. And we did that with YouGov, Government Polling Agency, so there was an awareness that the gender pay reporting hadn't naturally made the employers think, oh, let's do our ethnicity too. So that was announced at the same time as the results of the Race at Work survey, the Race at Work charter, and the consultation on mandatory ethnicity pay reporting. So it wasn't really about should we do this or not, more how should we do it.
And it's interesting you say that, because I think, you know, when I think about some of the conversations I'm having with other diversity practitioners and other companies around, well, how do we do this? It's something that I think everyone's grappling a little bit with, particularly given that a lot of organisations don't even track ethnicity. So they're not quite sure where to start. And this is where I'm going to come across to you, James, because, you know, kudos to you. Viacom are going to be releasing their ethnicity pay gap way ahead of any compulsory reporting. So why was that? Why are you kind of stepping out ahead of the game?
Well, I think fundamentally we believe in transparency of data and diversity. We've seen how that accelerates progress. You're right, we've made a big effort as an organisation over the last number of years to gather data on our employees, invite them to share with us their diverse characteristics. But I think more broadly than that, at Viacom, we understand that improving diversity in our organisation isn't just the right thing to do, but it's also good for business. So we get that as a more diverse organisation that we are, the stronger that we are as a business. So our goal, and by the way, for people who don't know what Viacom is, we are a TV broadcaster. We own Channel 5 here in the UK and run other global TV brands that you may be familiar with, like MTV and Comedy Central and Nickelodeon. So we're a TV broadcaster. But our goal in diversity is to reflect modern British society, both on screen in our programming and also in our workforce. We live this mantra of bringing your whole self to work. So, you know, Viacom is behind it, and I am too, as the leader of Viacom in the UK. I appreciate my ability to make progress and to get things done. I feel that's my responsibility as a leader, and other leaders have the same responsibility. In addition to that, I'm also the chair of CDN, which is the pan industry body. The chief executive's here in the audience today. Deborah, I see you there. But one thing I'm sensitive to as a leader is that some cynicism in parts, that when they see leaders like me standing up and talking about diversity, somehow it's not quite meant, and somehow it's hollow words. and I'm sensitive to that, but I'm also sympathetic to it. I think that the time for warm words is definitely behind us. And I think that as leaders, our actions and our outcomes need to speak much louder than our words. And I think that's exactly where data comes in. We're fortunate in the TV industry. We've now all of a sudden got a wealth of diversity data at our fingertips. And the ethnicity pay gap is just another element of that. It's important. It allows us to informs our policies and practices. It allows me as a leader to understand if we're making progress. But probably more important than that, that transparency allows the public and my employees to hold me as accountable as a leader to make progress. So yes, we're publishing in June. We're an advocate for it. We think other people should follow suit.
Thank you. Let's go to a quick poll question. So the poll question is, everybody ready? What's the estimated yearly UK pay gap for Black, Asian, and ethnic minority workers? Oh, interesting. Bottom two are fighting. There we go. Okay, well, the correct answer is 3.2 billion. Clearly not surprising for many of us in this room. So, Richard, as a practitioner, what have been some of the challenges organisations have faced, do you think, in relation to both the race agenda and the potential reporting?
I think, firstly, thank you very much for inviting me. And it's great to see everyone here and committed to this topic, and also a range of diversity topics as part of today as well. So there's diversity within the diversity narrative as well. I think it's important to highlight. I think some of the challenges that we see around, we refer to equality, diversity and inclusion, EDI, in the engineering construction industry, still exist. And I'm sort of the same. I've been working in this industry for about 15 years now, and I am sort of really fed up with how slow change is happening. But I do see that the ethnicity pay gap reporting as a real opportunity, because in organizations we measure things, in businesses we measure. And my team often kind of joke with me that data-driven and intelligence-led is almost like my catchphrase. If I can get it into every conversation, I will do. It's got to be data-driven and intelligence-led. And I do think that actually mandating the ethnicity pay gap reporting is that opportunity to really measure and to really support organizations to measure. There's guidance from the Race at Work campaign on using the census categories. Ask your staff. If you see that there's low numbers of disclosure, well, that's because they don't trust how you're going to use the data. So you need to really communicate. You need to get leaders to, again, demonstrate their personal commitment. So I think that the challenges do persist, but I also think that's because individuals need to connect with this narrative on a personal level. It's not right, it's not fair that there is an ethnicity pay gap. It's just not something that we can accept. I think as individuals, but also as organizations. And I really think if people connect with that personally, that will help drive culture change. Whereas at the moment, I still think it's a feeling that practitioners like myself, okay, well, you do it, you kind of fix it, but the rest of us kind of don't really get involved. And I do think that we need to see it as an issue of social injustice that persists. And I think that will help unlock a real passion that we do see in lots of the narratives as well.
Thanks. Well, you talked a lot about, starting the narrative. That's not often very easy within organisations, because if it was, we wouldn't be talking about race and ethnicity now. James, you've been doing some really interesting things around getting the narrative started in Viacom. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you've been doing?
Yes, certainly. And I think that, reflecting on the points you've heard already, I think that the wealth of data that we have in the TV industry in particular right now it's exploded over the last 2 or 3 years, be it Project Diamond came out of CDN, or our regulator Ofcom and their annual survey, or gender pay, and now ethnicity pay. But that transparency is really driving the conversation in a very positive way. For the first time, I think really, we're seeing the reality of what's happening within the industry and within the organisation from a diversity perspective, and it's driving a conversation, it's driving change. One thing we've seen in the data that we've gathered is that, well, let me take a step back. We're a 1,000 strong employee group here in the UK, and our BAME percentage of BAME employees in the UK is about 19%. So you might say, well, that's kind of a reasonable percentage, but I'm always reminded that we're fundamentally a London-based employer, so you probably should argue that that percentage should be a little higher. But we've got a bigger problem within senior management, within senior ranks. That percentage of representation of BAME employees is much, much lower. So it's something that we are focused on doing something about. Now we have Richard here from the Currell Group, who joined us at Viacom to help us to run some focus groups with our BAME employees to understand what the lived experience was of BAME employees within our organisation, which is very interesting. Do you want to know what they said?
Please.
Maybe unsurprisingly, there were three things that really jumped out for me. The first thing was the lack of prominent, or perceived lack of prominent BAME role models within the organisation, within senior leaders. The second was a fog or an uncertainty about how to navigate through the organisation to senior ranks. And then the third thing was the slight scepticism about some of the statements made about diversity. It's really interesting. It's valuable feedback, and it's allowed us to adjust our approach, I think, as to how we're going about improving things at Viacom. We're very focused, of course, on recruitment and doing that in the right way. But probably more importantly, about bringing talent through the organisation, identifying the talent that we have within the organisation and putting mechanisms in place to ensure that they come through the organisation. Things like sponsorship and mentoring, having a training plan, making sure all of our succession planning within the organisation factors in BAME and other diverse characteristics within it. And I think we've got the right measures in place to make improvements over time. The frustrating thing is that we have a low level of turnover within our organisation, something like 1% above VP level. We have the measures in place, but it will improve over time.
Thank you. You've said the term BAME twice, and I just have to pick that up because I know it polarises opinion as a term. Sandra, what are your members saying with regards to the ethnicity pay reporting? Is there a sense that we should do it with BAME as a collective or by the individual strands? And if we do it as BAME as a collective, are we masking some of the challenges within the various ethnic groups?
Yeah, so I would say, we talk about terminology, and I think it's really important that employers just kind of pick something, talk to your employee networks. What do you want? What terminology shall we use here so we can get over that and get to the issue? I think I've been obviously speaking to a lot of employers about this, and the switched on ones are already capturing employee data by ethnicity category. Even our survey was run so we can analyze it by ethnicity category. And there are issues on publishing data if you've got small numbers. So you can only, you're not supposed to kind of publish small numbers where you can kind of identify people. However, I think that where we are going to go with this is obviously encourage employers to capture by census categories, because that's what people understand. Those with larger groups of people from different backgrounds should be looking to publish some kind of insight on what the disparities are, or at least know what they are and add it to what I'm advocating for is some kind of narrative reporting, because it will mask pay disparities if you just put out BAME. Organisations who, even who are motoring away on diversity and who have got some representation at the top at the senior levels, say to me, "Oh, Sandra, but most of them are from Indian background. They're not Black, African, Caribbean, Pakistani, Bangladeshi." So the ones who are really forward-thinking and really wanting to have genuine ethnicity diversity want to be transparent about that and thoughtful. So I am an advocate for absolutely capturing it by census category, knowing what it says, but there are some principles around publishing and ensuring that you're not kind of exposing people as a part of that. So where you can, I think you should, and where you can't, in the narrative you explain that we know what's going on here and we've got some actions to address that.
Thank you. And just sort of following on from that, and a question really to the entire panel, should ethnic monitoring be mandatory? Because if it's not mandatory and we go ahead with the ethnicity pay reporting, knowing that most organisations either don't have data or only have a small percentage of data, how valuable an exercise will it really be?
I mean, I do think that question comes up quite often around mandating the monitoring process, but always they'll include a prefer not to say. So you can mandate it, but you can also provide the opt-out in case individuals don't trust the data. This narrative comes up around sexual orientation or non-visible diversity in lots of cases as well. And I know I worked with the military a few years ago where they'd moved from don't ask, don't tell into monitoring, and that was quite a quick shift. And they had about 70% saying prefer not to say because they didn't trust what they would do with that data at the time. That has improved. But I do think unless you mandate, you will get the organizations that probably need to do it most who don't. But I think it's reassuring staff on why you're asking that. And just probably from my sector, Mott MacDonald is a global engineering consultancy firm. We operate in 150 countries and have 17,000 staff. And even the narrative around diversity monitoring varies country by country. And so there's a lot of work that needs to go into really establishing that as a process, which most people in the room will know, but I do think it's something that needs to be a bit firmer, because otherwise the forward-thinking organisations will continue to do it, or are doing it, as Sandra said, already, but the ones that don't want to, but maybe would benefit the most, need that sort of slight push, and I do think mandating would help that. Providing there's a reassurance of the sort of opt-out option, which in itself can tell you quite a lot. If we see that, in some platforms or some countries that our surveys have 25% prefer not to say, whereas in other locations it's 1%, we can then see, right, well, actually, we clearly have got the narrative better in one location, whereas maybe not so in the other ones, really.
Sure. Well, I mean, the US have been mandating ethnic data forever, as far as for a long time. And maybe that might explain why there's more emphasis in the US than there is here. James, what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think I'd encourage other companies to do it. I think we'd support a government initiative to mandate it. Absolutely, we've seen the value in our industry and in our business of how transparency of data drives positive progress because of accountability, amongst other things. And so, absolutely, I think it should be something we would endorse. And on the point around the BAME categorization, it is a very broad. It's a very broad category. I do think it is publishing the ethnicity pay gap, which presumably will be classified as BAME, is a good first step. But I do think that in time, understanding the subcategorizations of ethnicity beyond BAME is very valuable. And indeed, I think as a diversity initiatives progress and mature, I think understanding the intersectionality between different aspects of diversity and different aspects of ethnicity, and I think that going deeper into the data that we have and understanding the different lived experiences of different intersections of diversity is going to be very valuable.
Thank you. I think we can all sit here and sort of wonder what's actually going to happen. Carol, you might be... I keep calling you Carol, I don't know why that is. Sandra, excuse me. Sandra, I think you are probably a lot closer to this than many of us in terms of what's really going on and what's likely to happen. What do you think is going to happen? How do you think this is going to play out?
So obviously I can't disclose what I know, but if I was an employer, I would be focused right now on getting my employees, thinking about how do we ensure the self-disclosure rates are good. I would be ensuring that I'm capturing the ethnicity data and pay, and if an opportunity, for example, came up where they said they wanted some employers maybe to test drive the kind of methodology, that would work because, with the consultation and talking to employers, I know people are saying it's not binary like gender, it's a bit more complicated. I would put my hand up to be one of the test drivers so that I could kind of, go through that process. So, as I say, it was a consultation on mandatory reporting. It wasn't should we do it, should we not. So I think we should expect that, there's something coming out to say that here's the date and here's the timeline and get moving. So
Any
that's my
guesses
personal
when that
thoughts.
might be?
I couldn't possibly tell.
I think she does know. Okay, do you think it's likely to be along the lines of BAME?
I could never tell. But no, I'm saying, I think, as I say, I think I know there are rules on what you can publish, you see. So as far as you can't publish tiny numbers that would, explore people. So I think one of the things I would strongly recommend that they test drive methodologies. So you can see if you do have small numbers and you run this model, what does it show? Is it obvious to see, or everybody will know that that's, Jack, Susie, and whatever, in that team. So I think a real kind of sensible approach, but the big thing is having the context reporting. So, for example, you may come up and say, well, I've only got 5% ethnicity pay gap, but then you've only got 2% ethnicity in your workforce and you're based in London. That is not a good result. Or if everyone's at the bottom of the organisation, that's not a good result. So there's some really important contextual bits that I think need to be in the report for it actually to be worth the paper it's written on. Otherwise, you can go out and say, ours is only 3%, but as I say, that's because there's only 3 people from ethnic minority background working there, and they all work at the bottom. Mm.
So sort of just following on a little bit from that, Sandra, and to the panel really, you've kind of alluded a little bit to what steps people should be taking now to be, ready for when it comes in. We've talked a little bit about, having a narrative. We've talked about starting to do ethnic monitoring. If you're not doing that, you start to talking about the context and sort of having the story. What other things particularly for those in the audience who perhaps have come from organisations where there is no ethnic monitoring or they're struggling to get those numbers up, what sort of things would you advise the audience?
I think there's actions that each of us as individuals can take, even if we feel that the wider dialogue is not happening in our organisations. And James mentioned earlier, role models. I think it's really important to have role models who are advocates. And I also appreciate, and having heard from colleagues, sometimes it's difficult to be the only one. And I've heard from really senior BAME role models in the industry more broadly who have said to me, I don't want to get involved. I just don't want to do it. And I have to kind of take that as their feedback and their own kind of lived experience. But I do think that that's a missed opportunity. And how you advocate has to be authentic to your personal style and also your journey, because if individuals don't want to make it a thing, because it is a thing in their businesses, that's really difficult. But I do think having role models, just asking the question, sort of say, actually, this is coming. Have you thought about it? Connecting with your employee networks if you have them, or start employee networks. Get together with colleagues who are passionate about this topic, because that energy, and this might sort of sound a little bit kind of hippie-ish, but that positive energy can grow, and actually you get together people you really feel from each other, where there's that sort of affinity and that symmetry, and that's contagious. If we sort of see our employee networks doing things and really sort of sharing that narrative, and it's like, actually, well, how would you advise us to start looking at this? And where would you find people? Because I've actually spoken to our graduates who know of senior BAME colleagues in the business who actually haven't come to me because they don't want to talk to the diversity guy. But I do actually think just trying to raise that narrative, ask those questions, we can make that impact as individuals, but also then speaking to people who you think might be more open to the questioning. One thing I would sort of say as well is that we know this is going to be happening. We see major clients embed gender pay gap reporting questions, obviously, in bids and tenders, but also we do see major clients including ethnicity pay gap data as part of our pre-qualifying questionnaires. So again, we know that is a real business case. If your client's asking and you're being judged and sifted for major projects, that is also going to really catalyze, I think, the efforts in organizations. So kind of know the hooks into your businesses will also help.
Mm. Yeah, both what Sandra and Richard said does resonate with me. On the, I think probably 2 or 3 years ago, we hadn't started gathering data on our employees in this way. But when we started, I think we found it maybe surprisingly straightforward. I think we've got something like 86% of employees that are now sharing their diversity characteristics with us, and it was about employee resource groups, and it was about really just asking our employees and explaining why we needed it and how it was going to be helpful in driving the business forward. and there was maybe a surprisingly little resistance to doing it. We've got in a short space of time got a high percentage of people who have shared the data with us, and we're obviously using it responsibly, and it's making a difference. And then to Sandra's point about the contextualization, I think that is important. I think we've seen with the gender pay gap numbers how you need to understand more deeply what's going on. There can be some really counterintuitive things can happen. Some things you think are positive initiatives to drive positive change that actually sends your pay gap statistics in the wrong direction, and other things that can send them in the other direction. It's quite sensitive to a few different things. So understanding, I think, the context beneath the big figure is helpful.
And I would say the key thing is get your employer to sign up for the Race at Work Charter if they haven't already done so, because the 5 commitments, one is a leader at the top of the office and a senior exec to be engaged in this, so that gives somebody to put their hand up to say they're going to take the lead. The second one is a commitment to capture data and publish. The third one is zero tolerance and bullying harassment, so that tackles a cultural piece, so people feel like they're included and belong, and that looks at employers and customers. The fourth commitment is all managers and leaders being responsible for promoting equality, and the fifth commitment is the progression of BAME talent in the workplace. And what it does, if you sign that up, first of all, you have to get leaders involved, then you can start to talk and say, we've signed this up, what are we now going to do to bring this to life? And start to explore those avenues and the issues within your organisation. And obviously there's the Race at Work survey responses that give some insight as to where you might want to look in your organisation, and you can shadow that with your own survey, your own insight on appraisal data, and look at correlations and say, actually the report says that and we seem to have similar challenges here. What are we going to do together as solutions? So that's what I would recommend that you do. And we do have a survey which is open only until the end of this month. It's very short, but there's some key questions in there that can also help you to think. What are the questions that we should be thinking about, depending on how early on you are in the journey? And again, it gives you an opportunity to get a group together and say, let's look at these questions. Can we answer them? And if not, where do we start and where do we get help and support to do that?
Thank you, that's useful. Just as we're about to close, because we're running out of time. So as I started by saying that it's taking us some time to get race and ethnicity sort of on the agenda, given that we have already had the gender pay gap, are there any lessons that we can learn? And is there anything that you think that we should be doing to ensure that, for a topic that's still quite difficult, how do we ensure that there's greater accountability and progress post the reporting?
I mean, I would echo Sandra's point about the narrative and the context. Just going, here's a number, can mask a whole load of issues, and could look really good or look really bad. But I think it's having those conversations to say, what is that really telling us? And I've seen that in organisations that I work with, where facilitating the conversation in a certain way, so that the businesses don't jump to quick fixes, but it's like, well, why is that? And really listening to colleagues to say, there's a glass ceiling, there's a double glazed glass ceiling for BAME women. What does that look like, and why is that? And I do think the numbers sometimes helps leaders to go, oh yeah, maybe. Whereas before it was like, no, I've not seen that. And it's like, well, you might not have seen that because you're a majority individual, but these people are saying this is their experience. And sometimes the numbers can just be that little extra weight to make sure you really listen to the dialogue coming from your staff. So I do think it's compounding the voices that are there, but sometimes businesses like those numbers to help those conversations.
Well, one thing's for sure, the genie is out of the bottle now. There's no turning back. It's time to kind of wake up to this as a topic, because it's coming. So thank you very much to my panellists. Thank you.